We are all the way live.
We are ready to go live. I heard, I don't want to promise anything, that maybe during the season, Cecil Lammey will be able to join us again on Thursday nights.
What?
Without Cecil. We'll see.
What?
I don't want to put Cecil on the spot, promise anything. And make sure that our people are there. Hey, everybody, this is live, but not officially live. So we give a little bit of time for a count up here. And we are live Thursday night. The fire hose is on. News out of training camps. Lots of takes flying left and right. You are preparing for your drafts, preparing for the season. And we're here for you. We're here for each other. Always here on the Audible Thursday night. And as always, we've got Dr. Jene here. We can pick your brain. I guess, Jene, first and foremost, is it an overreaction to move A.J. Green down all the way to the bottom of his tier? Is it an overreaction to move him down a tier? Is it an overreaction to say, I know what I'm going to get if I draft A.J. Green, I'm just not going to do it? What's the appropriate amount of reaction?
I told Matt a little while ago that I was going to be just sort of underreacting all day today to all these takes, but I mean, is this third year in a row A.J. Green has been struggling as the season has started? And I mean, at some point, despite my hate of the injury-prone term, you just have to be worried that we're never going to be able to ramp up to 100% strength without some sort of issue moving forward. And maybe this is a minor injury, and A.J. Green was apparently moving pretty well, and Zach Taylor's pretty much maybe just like us saying, okay, that's it. You can't get through a practice. We're going to see if you can get through a game and be done with it. I don't know if that's how it's going to go down or not. We still have 3 weeks before we have to.
Uh-oh.
I think he pulled a hamstring.
Yeah.
I did?
Yeah.
Video. There we go. You're back.
Maybe.
Well, while we're waiting for Dr. Jene, you there?
Am I here?
You're here now.
Maybe I ought to come back in. How about that?
Slight max headroom vibe, but otherwise we are back.
You think we're okay?
Yeah. So
I've never been gone, so I've just been talking to myself this whole time. I don't know.
But no, not the whole time. Bottom line, A.J. Green, err on the side of pushing him down farther or not?
Yeah, I mean, yes, I think you have to. I don't know how much you heard me ramble on about A.J. Green there, but I don't know how you couldn't at this point. I mean, Zach Taylor doesn't seem to be too concerned. A.J. Green doesn't seem to be too concerned. But at the same token, they're essentially saying, we're not going to do anything until the season starts at this point. You can almost be surprised unless you see him, if you would see him practice before the ramp up to week 1. Now, you'd love to see him do a little bit more and get through a reconditioning period and make it through more than 1 or 2 practices without some sort of soft tissue injury. But that's not been the case for some time. So, yeah, I think the upside is there. Everything we're hearing about Joe Burrow seems pretty good, the offense, but, we're worried about the offensive line. There are other mouths to feed there. Tyler Boyd is playing well. Joe Mixon is going to be an important option for Burrow. So, I don't think there's, a 5th or 6th round ADP at this point?
Well, dropping, like as of
so I mean, if
late
you're in
July.
the 6th round, how many targets do you think? I mean, you're hoping for 110, 120 targets probably, right? I mean, at some point where he actually looks like a wide receiver 1, I don't know how you can count on that at this point. And I don't like to use the term injury prone, but at some point you have to just, swallow whatever and say, this is kind of where we are with him. So yeah, I move him down a tier. I guess when you're in that area, yes, it involves moving him down a tier. If you're going to move him down to the bottom of that tier, what's left? The next tier. So you may as well move him into the next tier, and you're looking for some sizable multiple round injury discount in order to trust him, unless something changes the next couple of weeks where they do put him back on the practice field and he looks fine. Yeah, I think you have to move him down significantly.
So Kerrion Johnson walks into a bar and sees Sony Michel. Tell us a little bit more about that knee brace.
Well, I don't think we ever really knew exactly what happened with Kerrion Johnson's knee. I mean, I can't remember exactly what I speculated. I mean, we knew it wasn't an ACL, and it didn't appear, I don't remember it being surgical. So, is it PCL? Was there an ongoing MCL thing? But the deal with the brace is not going to protect his knee from future injury. So if that's the reason he's wearing it, then it's a red flag. And if you know it's not going to protect your knee from future injury and you're wearing it for comfort, that's a red flag. So I don't know what to think about Kerrion Johnson having that big bulky brace on there. I don't know why that you would be going through drills and now padded practices with it unless there wasn't something right. And we'd have to see him with uniform pants over that thing moving well to feel comfortable that he could be anything close to what he was before these injuries. So, we're hearing a ton about hamstring this and hamstring that, but I think you picked out one of the important things that we've heard over the past 10 days, which is this is a meaningful situation. It means that he's not comfortable in his knee recovery, and we are months and months and months and months since he's had whatever injury it was.
Similar question, Gene. Let me put it this way. Let's say I found out I got the 9th, 10th, 11th pick in my draft. I really love what Miles Sanders did after Jordan Howard got hurt last year. I think he's going to be even better this year. That was going to be my guy. Now we have week-to-week lower body injury, so we're in the vague zone. They haven't done anything as far as personnel moves. That's good, I think. There's sources saying that they're not worried about him. Should we change our ranking of Sanders based on this?
I don't think so. I'm comfortable with the sources, quote unquote, in this situation. The Philadelphia beat writers have had no issue calling Doug Peterson's day-to-day, week-to-week BS in the past. And they seem to be in line with everybody else where they're saying that I'm really not hearing anything that would suggest there's a concern here. Yes, he's wearing a sleeve and that might give you a little bit of pause, but generally, so with Alshon Jeffrey and Deshaun Jackson and so many other players over the years, you'll hear Peterson say day to day, which means week to week. And we're hearing week to week on Sanders, which just says they're really not going to put him back in practice anytime soon, whether they're concerned or not. But the beat writers don't seem to think that this is the next highest grade other than what Peterson is suggesting. So I think, what was it today? Some sort of sleeve or leg compression bandage or something like that. That feels like calf, maybe. I don't know. I'm just freely speculating here, but it doesn't sound like an ankle thing or a knee thing. You wouldn't like to have him to have a hamstring or a quad or a calf at this stage of camp during the reconditioning process. But the tone of things from beat writer to beat writer is reassuring enough that if he was your guy in that range, I don't think you need to move him to an extra tier. And if he was in that tier anyway, you may as well go for the upside that you thought was there. Because again, we're a month before he's got to be productive in week 1.
So I know this is all apples and oranges, but at least we're in the grocery store. So I'm going to talk about groin strain versus hamstring strain, maybe for a wide receiver. Say like, I don't know, a guy like Sammy Watkins and his groin strain is, say if it's mild to moderate in that range, and you compare a groin strain that's mild to moderate to a hamstring strain that's mild or moderate, which one would you rather have for a wide receiver and why?
I don't know. I don't like hamstring strains for receivers that need to get to top speed and explode and continue their speed downfield. Groin strains are no fun either, especially if groin means, core abdominal thing, which I think we've kind of gotten away from the last couple of years. Teams are saying it's core abdomen instead of groin if it's really, and all those complexes are kind of close together, but they're meaningfully different enough in terms of one is likely to be repaired with surgery and the other one isn't. So if it was a sports hernia type situation, we've seen how that's affected receivers over the years, and that would make me nervous because that's very difficult to sink your hips into a break and then explode out of it. And that's not so much Sammy Watkins' game. So in his case, I think hamstring would be more concerning than groin. But anything at this point for Sammy Watkins raises a concern. So maybe you feel slightly better groin versus hamstring, but he's another player that needs to get back on the field. And I think we're going on almost a week with him where he's not been able to practice. So you'd like to see him do a little bit of something before, well in advance of week 1 would be nice.
Well, I wanted to ask you about a theory, Gene, just to see if this jives with you, because Odell Beckham had that hernia last year, and we're using it to explain why his play was diminished. It sounds like Deontay Johnson was playing with a hernia for at least part of the year, including the part that he played at best at the end of the year. So should we be giving Deontay Johnson, or really any players, we can limit it to hernia, but we can talk about other types of injuries too, where we find out about these injuries long after the fact. We find about the surgery in the offseason. Should we be open to them being even better than we thought they were?
Sure. Yeah, I think even though we're going to try to compare similar body parts, similar injury, known surgery from player to player, everybody recovers a little bit differently. Everybody's body is built to to kind of compensate for different injuries differently. But yes, for a player, I think, I kind of said this about Adrian Peterson, who's in a class of his own as far as injury recovery goes. There's just going to be some players that manage certain injuries better than others. And, I didn't go back and look snap by snap at Odell Beckham, but it certainly sounds like from what I've heard from Matt Harmon that there was a big difference in his play last year that didn't match what we'd seen in the past. There's so many factors that go into how a wide receiver plays. But, when Matt boils things down to, essentially a separation score, and Beckham's was much worse last year, then you can sort of, you can remove locker room issues. Possibly you could remove Baker Mayfield's play, offensive line play, game script, coaches, what have you. But I do think, I think that's reasonable to think that maybe there is a little bit more upside remaining in Deontay Johnson if he was as productive as he was, and can take a further step forward now that he's fully healthy and that surgery behind him.
All right. So this is a little off the beaten path, but, I certainly see things where, you see in other industries where people get really, really attached to equipment and different types of things that will give them an edge in their performance. And I keep thinking about athletes in the sense that they, the sports massages to the go into like these chambers where they get their body parts basically frozen, or it seems like they're like basically going into these like, kind of like into those types of things, to like the little tent air chambers that they sleep in. Like Frank Gore supposedly sleeps in one of those things, which is why he probably now at this next point, the best thing that fantasy owners can probably say is, dude, get a life. Like at this point, maybe that's what they're going to be begging, is that he just needs to get a life, because he probably doesn't have one if he's sleeping in a tent. But can you talk about some of the benefits of these things and how much it is beneficial to how much of it is just equipment and psychological?
Mm-hmm. It's probably a mix of both. Placebo effect is pretty strong. Anything that you feel like helps your recovery, and if there's any sense that you feel better afterwards, whether it's reproducible medical experiment or not, it's hard to know. There's some indication that those hyperbaric chambers and tents, I don't know what the percentage of oxygen that would be in a tent versus a chamber necessarily, and the cryotherapy, if it's not harmful and you feel like you get an edge, then I think the psychological edge is just as important as any sort of medical benefit that there may have.
Well, I have a related question, Gene. The latest player to get on and hey, Bob Harris for this one, to get on the plant-based diet train. Yeah, Waldman knows where I was going with this. Alvin Kamara. And again, we could get into the whole idea of, does it actually improve things? And there's that psychological placebo effect. But there are some people who feel like it can affect recovery. I think there was rumors of, was it a problem for Rob Gronkowski, maybe? I can't remember. But this seems to have become kind of an issue where you have a strong reaction sometimes negatively. Is there anything to that, to feel, oh no, when you hear that somebody on your fantasy team is switching to a vegan diet?
I don't know. I haven't looked into this strongly enough to know. I've seen some fairly strong takes on Twitter about, this is a positive thing, this is a negative thing. My general take would be, if you are getting the right mix of nutrients in, supplementing if necessary, if you're not, and taking care of your body in other ways, I don't know of any indication that it would change connective tissue or muscle mass or what have you. If you're getting the right type of calories with the right type of nutrients, I would think it would be okay, but I have no way of knowing. Also, we only know the players that are telling us that they're on these diets necessarily. So to rely on, 5-10 players, and then sort of compare what they did before and after, those are good anecdotes. And at some point, a number of anecdotes are helpful. Adam Harstead likes to say, the plural of anecdote is not data, but it is evidence. And after a while, some of that evidence becomes meaningful, even if it, doesn't qualify as a sample size and data and what have you. So I don't know enough to have a strong opinion there necessarily. To say I would advise somebody to not do a plant diet if they were, or something like that. But and I think what'll tell the tale there is if we see more and more players eventually. Kamara and there was some concern with Arian Foster back in the day. I think we had this conversation maybe about Cam Newton and a few others as well. Just sort of see how things go. But I'm not versed enough in the medical literature to say that that it's clearly a risk to their health and durability moving forward.
We all know that Brett Favre was on the beer and Twinkie diet, and look how long he played. So, I mean, anyway.
So many factors to health and well-being and all that sort of stuff. So, life is a little bit different in 2020 than it was in 1995.
Is he the equivalent of the Latvian woman who like drinks a fifth of whiskey and smokes 2 packs a day and lives till she's like 97? Because maybe he's like the NFL equivalent of that. I don't know.
At some point in our lifetimes, we're going to find out that almost everything that we ever talk about is so polygenomic and multifactorial that is, whatever. Right?
Yeah. Makes total sense. So
I don't know if it does or not, but that's what I'm going with for now.
Yeah, that works for me. I mean, it gives me a chance to stall while I'm trying to figure out if there's another hamstring thing that I want to ask you about, but I really don't.
We got KJ Hamler, we got Tyreek Hill, we got T. Higgins is recovering, DeAndre Hopkins is back. All these things over and over again. I think my general feeling with these is, we talked about internally in our staff back and forth today. I know when people ask me internally, and you guys ask me on these shows for more public consumption, what should we do with our rankings? What should we do on our tiers? And that's the critical question everybody is considering right now. And my answer is I don't know what to make of the fact that Tyreek Hill jogged off the field, or such and such player hasn't recovered within a week, or what does day to day versus week to week mean? We're hearing KJ Hamler is going to be out for a couple of weeks, so generally you would think that's a mid-grade injury, but what is that? Is somebody cramping? Are they tight? Is there something that they were already worried about and he just didn't feel right, so they shut him down and he could have practiced the next day? We are stuck in a situation, especially this season, without any preseason games. These players probably wouldn't have been playing in preseason games anyway. I just seemingly for the last 4 or 5 years, I get a little bit nervous about players that we know are going into the season with soft tissue injuries, but I just don't know how aggressively we need to be changing our minds about players that we've had fairly strong takes and a developed opinion over weeks and weeks and months when we hear something like this. I think the important thing is what I've said for years now is the week before the regular season is most important. The week before the regular season is helpful too. So any player that gets back on the field 2 weeks ahead of week 1, you feel pretty good about, because they're going to be very likely through 2 weeks of football related activity before they're cleared for week 1. And then if they're fully practicing in those last couple of days, you can be fairly certain that they're going to get a full workload right away and be at relatively low risk of a compensation or a recurring injury. For the players that aren't on the field until Wednesday before week 1, you just don't really know. And there's no way for us to know what's precaution and what isn't. You can absolutely see a team like the Bengals choosing to do absolutely nothing with AJ Green until the Sunday, Monday before the regular season, ramp him up, see if he's part of the game plan, and then go, and not do anything else until then. A player like KJ Hamler, a rookie, you probably want to see where he stands a little bit sooner. So there are going to be some subtle things that we might be able to determine as we get closer to September. But on August the 20th, to decide whether or not a day-to-day is actually going to become week-to-week, we're just not going to get that information. And if we start getting, we're lucky in some of these respects. I think that, most of it, we're still getting an injury narrowed down to a body part. But, you can give me a lower body injury like Miles Sanders, and good luck, right? And I'm always honest with you guys in this situation. I'm not going to try to speculate necessarily, and I tend to go in 2 different directions. I am pessimistic in general during the regular season about a player's recovery until we see it. I am optimistic about a player's recovery in the offseason, knowing that there's a larger buffer there. But we're getting the clock is starting to switch from off-season optimism to in-season pessimism. And the sooner these guys get on the field and get through their situations without any aggravated injuries, the better. We're just not at a point yet where we can say, well, he didn't practice today, so that means we have to be worried about week 4. Just there's too many weeks in between to know that situation is there. And you would hope that if any of these players had significant enough injuries that they were trending potentially toward an in-season IR or PUP, that we'd get some indication from national media, if not local media. And I know this media environment's a little bit different with COVID, but I'm still, in my mind, playing it that way, that if there was a injury that was threatening week 1 significantly, we would probably hear a little bit more about it. Deebo Samuel, those sorts of things as we go. So I'm going to choose to remain optimistic for at least another week or so. But if we get to the point where these players with soft tissue injuries are not back on the field within 2 or 3 weeks, and then you do have to start wondering, okay, really was this a mid-grade injury that could be a 4 to 6 week situation? But I'm not willing to decide which one of these 4 players is not like the other a month before the season starts.
All right, Gene, let's play Parse the Quote. In the subject here is TJ Hockenson. And really, this all has blown over, and there might not be much to say about this, but I just want to get your thoughts because he said, well, first it was tweeted out as he said he wasn't 100% and that his ankle was bothering him. But this is the actual quote. Yeah, I'm out there running around. I'm doing everything I was able to do last year, just trying to improve on it. The ankle's still there. I still notice it, but I'm getting there. I'm 100%. I think one of the things I'm trying to keep using. Sometimes guys after an injury come back and baby that. That's not something I want to do. That's not something I even want to pay attention to. That's what I'm getting towards, and that's where I'm at kind of at this point. I'm super excited for this year. I'm ready to go out there running around, and we're all just trying to push forward. Anything worrisome there?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, if we're going to parse that quote, I think my clinical spidey sense would be we really haven't had any time this offseason to test this in a true football-related activity moment against other players my caliber. These are the first couple of weeks I've been able to do that. I'm still gaining some confidence. I feel like I'm 100%, but I just haven't done it yet. So ask me in a week. That's kind of where I feel where we are there. You know how I feel about players listing percentages. I mean, good luck trying to tell me whether somebody's 85 or 86.8%. The only thing that tells you is they don't feel like they're fully there yet. We don't know whether or not TJ Hockenson had surgery or not. I don't know that was ever reported. The Lions are the Patriots Midwest, as we've said so many times. I still have no idea exactly what happened with Marvin Jones last year, and TJ Hockenson the same way. So, I think this is a little bit of an issue where we're not getting a lot of practice video and preseason games to actually see how well he's moving. So I think there's lots of good reasons to suspect that most of this is behind. And we heard just as many good things this offseason as we did questionable things about Hockenson, I feel like, between his workout videos and some of the other things. So he doesn't seem to be too concerned, but you can see how players like, some of these players are a little bit more willing to downplay things and say they're not quite 100%. And some of them are going to overhype where they are and say, I'm totally fine, and may not be. So I'm not going to put too much stock in that either. I think it's a really good sign that they didn't start him on the PUP list. It's a really good sign that he continues to participate in these padded practices, and we'll see what develops. But I don't have too much concern about Hockenson right now. I think he's fairly safe to consider healthy.
Well, I guess I'm going to have to ask it because I know that Cecil and Bloom have been they've been worried about this one, right? Because they'll have no one else to make fun of if he doesn't come back and play. And that's Joe Flacco. What's going on with his cervical issue? Is he going to be able to play again? And because I know that, obviously nobody wants to wish those guys to be hurt, but I know that, he holds a special place in their hearts.
The news on Flacco over the last few days, well, probably 10 to 14 days, has been really good. The early indications were the timing of the surgery, the fact that it was a cervical injury, was likely to put him on in-season IR, and maybe he'd be a mid-season return. Now there's some indication that that may not be the case, and they may have him on the active roster, thinking that he could be available to him as soon as the first month of the season. That may still be a little bit optimistic for a player that really can't participate in any training camp activities. So with this year's in-season IR, at least what was reported, I did a little bit more research on this today because it still seems to be there's some confusion out there of what the 3 weeks actually means. Is it unlimited? All injuries can come off in 3 weeks, or is this going to apply more to the COVID list than not? I've got bits and pieces of those NFLPA, NFL memos and negotiations tweeted out there, but I don't know that there's been a single place, I can't find it on the NFL website, that says these are the rules by which we're actually playing. But, so we'll keep looking into that to see what that is. But my sense is he's not likely to start the season on the active roster. Well, they'll start the season on the active roster and they'll move him to one of those lists, whether it's injured reserve at 3 weeks, PUP at 6 weeks, hard to know. But the news is fairly good on Flacco, where there's a lot more daylight for him to participate earlier in the season than there was as of a couple weeks ago.
We are happy that Dr. Gene participates in our season, in our off season, in our preseason, in all the seasons. They're all Dr. Gene seasons. And thankfully, we haven't had to consult you yet on anything that's really shook up our draft boards. But be ready. Be ready for that signal, the squirrel signal that we need.
Yeah, well, we're 3 or 4 days into padded practices, so it's no surprise that the list is growing a little bit longer already. Players really aren't going necessarily full strength and not full contact in those conditioning workouts in the ramp up period. So these next two, I think there's only, I can't remember if it's 10 or 12 padded practices, but over these next couple of weeks, it won't be preseason games that concern us, but we're going to get trickles of all of the stuff that, as you say, we have to parse coming out of these training camp practice reports from the local writers. So hopefully we get enough information. Otherwise, I think I saw somebody in the chat room saying it's going to be busy that first week. And like always, when we go from preseason to in-season mode, that first press conference on Monday leading into week 1 and those practice participation reports on Wednesday really our first indication sometimes of what a player actually or what a team actually thinks of where their injured player status currently are.
Well, Gene, thank you for carrying the weight of knowing that when some football injury happens, everybody says, "Where's Dr. Gene?" You do that gracefully for us. Thank you.
I will do my best. Enjoy the week. See you, boys.
See you.
All right. And now we get into the second half hour. I'm going to get some backgrounds. I really should have got the backgrounds from Cecil a long time ago. I may even change them. You had a lot of fun with screen sharing back in the day, if I remember correctly. Sometimes you would even just change what we would see with you. I miss that. It's fun.
Cecil hasn't been around, so I haven't had a chance to really stick it to you guys the way I used to. But I'm saving it for when Cecil returns.
Yes, and look, folks. Cecil hopefully will return soon, and we'll be having fun here as we always are. And we have a lot to look at in your latest gut check, by the way. Very voluminous tiers. I think the best part of your tiers, Matt, is just that secret Matt Waldman content, like DK Metcalf is a hammer, Tyler Lockett's a multi-tool, but DK Metcalf's a damn good hammer.
Sure is, man.
It's great. No, I mean, this is I sometimes just want to do that kind of brain dump, But let's get into your tiers. Let's dig in, all right? Because you have a no-fly list. I love that, by the way. So I can't believe anybody else hasn't taken that as that. I think what was it? Eliminate the suck, I think, is another one. Just that idea of the players that again, because part of it is that you're not going to take them because of ADP. But the thing that stood out to me is that Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes are the only two quarterbacks on your no-fly list.
Yeah.
And I have to figure that this is one of those situations where you put your rankings together by some sort of process that you trust. And I know you're always evaluating your processes, self-scouting and improving. And then you said, well, if that's what my process says, then that's what my process says, and that's what I'm putting out there. You can tell me if I'm off base. Just how do we lead to Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes are the quarterbacks to avoid? Is it about them? Is it about the other quarterbacks? How do we get there?
Just about the other quarterbacks, really, more than anything else in a draft plan. And like I said, with everybody, there are certain types of draft strategies that you're going to have where you'll absolutely want to take a Lamar Jackson or Patrick Mahomes, 2 quarterback leagues, upside down, 0 RB type of drafting. But for the average schmo who's going to be like listening to this, who's going to, in most leagues where they're just looking to dominate, to me, the idea of drafting those 2 guys early just doesn't make a lot of sense when you're going to have Tom Brady and Drew Brees and Ben Roethlisberger and Matthew Stafford and Russell Wilson, who are all relative values, and the difference between, quarterback and the rest of the quarterbacks isn't usually that strong. So to me, it's like Tom Brady in the 6th or 7th round with those receivers. Come on, why aren't you making him like your top priority? Drew Brees with Jared Cook, Emmanuel Sanders, Mike Thomas, and a healthy Alvin Kamara. I mean, Drew Brees was on track for 4,500 yards with basically, like I say every week, Michael Thomas and dry kindling. So it's like, or wet kindling, really. So I just look at this and I think those guys are better values. And so why put yourself in the situation where you're tempted by great players who their value in fantasy isn't just going to be that much better that
Right.
they deserve that. When you can get better, safer players at other positions who are less risky relative to their position.
And you're right. I mean, in the sense that you start to look down the quarterback list and you're thinking, yeah, I get Brady, Breeze at quarterback 9, 10, Roethlisberger, quarterback 15, Tannehill outside the top 15, take a chance on Cam Newton.
Yeah,
And-
so it's
Yeah.
and just to give you, and there is a process behind. The process was I looked at my projections for the players. I looked at the ADP. I rated my players by my projections. And if there was a huge gap between my value and ADP, and I had it on kind of a curve for
Right.
the early rounds to the later rounds, if that was too much of a differential, like for the first 2 to 3 rounds, if it was more than like 14 picks in a 12-round draft, I was like, well, you know what? For the first couple of rounds, or maybe more than 24 by rounds 3 to 4, I'm like, if I have to reach a couple of rounds to get these guys, no, I'm not doing it.
Right. Right. Okay. So let's talk about the no-fly list, but more the negative space. Because, for instance, Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I know anyone that trusts Matt Waldman will not take Clyde Edwards-Helaire in their redraft draft this year because you have him well below the first-round price that he's going to cost in every draft. The question then becomes, Matt, well, if you're right, some other Chiefs back is going to be worth more than we expect. Is there another Chiefs back that you would tell folks to target instead of Edwards-Helaire?
I mean, anybody who's available after like the 12th round, I think is worthwhile in that respect. So I think you can take shots on those guys and feel like that you really haven't spent a lot of capital on them. So I mean, DeAndre Washington is probably going to be a guy that people feel pretty good about. I'm still not giving up on Darwin Thompson, only because though every beat writer in the Chiefs hemisphere seems to be talking about how writing these like speculative articles about who's going to get cut or who's going to get traded. The staff actually was quite positive about him. And when you watch him on the field, I just don't see how anybody looks at him and looks at DeAndre Washington and says, ooh, there's such a major difference between these two players. If anything, I thought Darwin Thompson looked better year one than DeAndre Washington did for his first few years in the league. Mm-hmm. So I'm looking at this, and I would probably say for right now, most of the guys when it comes to the Chiefs, I just look at it's Clyde Edwards-Helaire you're banking on, or you're going to get guys off the waiver wire, because even the guys that most fantasy owners are going to draft and saying, ooh, I'm making the astute late round pick, they're probably going to get impatient and drop those suckers anyway by week 4, week 5. So I would say, no, there's nobody I'm like in hot and heavy to go and get right now.
And why do you think, just briefly, because Matthew Bubar, a long time, wonderful member of our community, has been waiting for the CEH discussion. Why do you think that you're so much lower on him than the consensus?
Well, I'll give you some supplementary stuff you can listen to. Dwayne McFarland and I did an RSP cast in our projection series where we debated this. But it's just essentially that I think Clyde Edwards-Helaire is a good runner. He was my number 11 player overall on my 3-year rankings for the RSP, in August. So I think long-term he's going to be nice, but I just don't believe that he's going to earn 80% of the workload. And I believe that he's going to need 80% of the workload to give you top 10 production, much less mid-range, RB1 value. If he gets 60 to 70%, he's still somewhere in the top 15 to top 20 of running backs. That's where I have him. I just think that the depth chart that Edwards-Helaire is working with is far better, even though it doesn't seem like it, far better than what Kareem Hunt was dealing with after Spencer Ware got hurt. And the fact that first year that everybody loves to cite was with Captain Checkdown, Alex Smith. You really think that Patrick Mahomes, who's like, as I joke, his mantra is because I can quarterback's going to go, we've got Clyde Edwards-Helaire. So instead of throwing in the intermediate to deep range to a wide open Tyreek Hill, a wide open Travis Kelce, Nicole Hardman, and Byron Pringle, he's not bad either. But I mean, really, those first three receivers I just mentioned, you think that he's not going to be able to find an open man downfield? Yeah, he'll check some to Edwards-Helaire, and there'll be some design plays for him. But that's not 80 reception type of work,
right.
And I think that people are overestimating his reception count. They're overestimating his workload. He's not unbelievable as an inside runner. I mean, he's decent enough, but he's not such a master at it that they're going to buck the trend of what they've done with other Chiefs backs, which is they take the lead back out during goal line situations or in red zone situations more often than you would expect. And so when I put all that together, I just can't find a reason why I'm optimistic that he's going to get as high of a workload as people are projecting him to have to get to be a top 10 back or number 6 back in a redraft league.
Anybody who draws that 7, 8, 9 pick and looks at rankings and thinks, I guess I have to take Edwards-Helaire, Matt Waldman is there for you to say, no, you don't. You don't have to. One other negative space one, you have Will Fuller on the no-fly list, which makes a lot of sense. It's kind of like that AJ Green take of when are you going to stop arguing with reality if year after year this is what reality presents with us. But is there a Texans wide receiver that you then pivot to, or even Duke Johnson or Darren Fells or Jordan Akins getting some good reports here? And because you also have Deshaun Watson the highest out of that tier with Prescott and Wilson and Kyler Murray. So is there a Texans target you like?
Yeah, like Brandon Cooks this year for a change. This is the first year I think he's appropriately valued where he's like a good value to pick him up, because every year everyone's hoping to become the next Steve Smith, and every year he gets his ass traded somewhere. And he's good. He's just not, he's not an alpha number one. He's like technically a number one, but he's not the guy that you really value in that way. So I think that the way the Texans like to run routes, the way that they will use him is complementary to his skills. I think that the fact that he has proven to be a fairly durable player who what he does well, he does really well. These are all good things. Even if he gets traded, it seems like, or ends up on a different team every single year, he plays well. It's not like he's a bad player. So I just feel like that this is a good situation for him. And the fact that, people aren't asking to draft him at the end of round 2 or round 4. He's like getting drafted, between rounds 5 and 8 probably is more of his range. And on the lower end of that range, why not at that stage? I mean, you're getting basically a guy who you can pick him as like a wide receiver 3, but probably get high-end wide receiver 2 production out of with wide receiver 1 weeks. That's the Brandon Cooks selection that I've always been waiting for.
I'm taking him too, actually. I have him and Fuller so close, and I actually probably have Fuller ahead in my ranks right now. But they're right next to each other, I believe, and when I have to choose between the two, I end up taking Cooks. It's going to be interesting to see how that whole passing game shakes out, because Randall Cobb looks good, and that's an OG Waldman favorite, and he's staying healthy. And you've talked about the Deshaun Watson slot connection, and the ESPN writer Sarah Barshop, I think, wrote about how the slot hasn't really been filled with any stable player for Deshaun Watson. It wasn't Kiki Cutie. That's sad, but it's not going to be him. It's going to be Randall Cobb this year, and he's an interesting one for sure. So sometimes you give us a wonderful analogy or metaphor. Sometimes you give us some more detail. But with Ronald Jones, you just gave us a nice declarative statement that you're sold on him as a top 15 running back value this year. This has been one of the most talked about players in fantasy circles. You have something to say, I'm sure, more than that. The confidence, and I'll say this about Ronald Jones. If we were going to do a list of the players that we feel reasonably confident will lead their backfields in touches, we can say that about Ronald Jones, right? I mean, we're reasonably confident he's going to lead. He's the cheapest one. Yeah. He's the cheapest running back on the board that's going to lead his backfield in touches. That alone is a reason to like him. What else?
Well, what else is that he breaks a crap ton of tackles, like per attempt, which is fantastic for a guy who we thought might be like a Jamal Charles, like scat back. And then he gained all this weight. And then we're like, oh, when they gain weight, that never works out. No, it worked out pretty darn well, because what he figured out in the NFL is that he needed to be more decisive into the crease and figure out where those creases are. And at the point where maybe he was getting too cute and tentative with his skills, at the point of attack, he was learning that, look, I've got to be more decisive, and I'm going to get stronger so that I can break some tackles, even if I don't hit that crease perfectly, or if that's not the perfect crease to hit. And he's gotten better as a runner. He's been more decisive. I thought he did a much better job with that. Towards the end of the season, I was watching him do a fantastic job of being able to cut, not just from one gap over, but sometimes 2 to 3 gaps over, and make the type of play that you would see from an expert level running back in terms of, footwork and agility. And I call it foot-eye coordination, basically being able to see what you're supposed to see and react to it appropriately. And he's showing that on a more advanced level. And so you combine that to the fact that he already caught 36 passes last year. And now Bruce Arians is already said after 1 week, because I do the Bucs training camp coverage for football guys with, Bob Henry and Jason Wood editing that whole project. That's fantastic. And one of the things is Bruce Arians said week 1, the rest of these guys are basically trying to find a role that's going to work for them when Ronald Jones gets tired. He's our feature back. That's essentially what he said. And Tom Brady's working with them in terms of his receiving skills. They said that he already looks a lot better in terms of catching the ball. They're just working on him with little things that Tom Brady can teach him about what James White did. Right. So you put all that together, you put these great weapons in order, and it's like, of course, this is going to be a good situation. I feel like he has top 10 upside, but I'd look at him as more realistically. The baseline to me is somewhere in the top 15 to top 20. And at the round price he's at, gosh, you got to get him.
Yeah, if he gets the goal line carries, I think he's fine. Like you said, he reinvented himself as a more rugged back, as he looked more like a... What I remember watching him at USC was, if he saw the hole and he got his shoulders square, like parallel to the line of scrimmage, and he hit that boost where it got locked in, forget it. And that was the Jamal Charles quality. But that's not really what he's leveraging in the pros. What he's leveraging is more flexibility and strength and that functional running. And what did you think, by the way, speaking of Tom Brady, that Jones said Brady told him, run your route like you already have the ball. And that seemed to really make the light bulb go on for him.
Yeah, that was one of the things that I was referencing, but I didn't say it specifically. And I'm glad you mentioned that. I think part of that is it allows you to be a little bit quicker in and out of your breaks. It allows you also to be in a situation where you can transition quicker after the catch. And transitioning is everything that a lot of players don't understand when they come out of the college game. George Kittle, the reason why he's so fantastic, even though he said it like basically the kind of, how would you put it? Kind of like a himbo might put it, which is basically, I just turned up field and decided to run, and I ran over people and I just kept going Well, the technical term for that is actually catch and pierce, which is to basically catch the ball and immediately turn downhill so that you are efficient with, your alignment and your bodies in order to be able to break tackles as quick as possible. And that's what I think Tom Brady's trying to set up for Ronald Jones in that respect. And Ronald Jones it took him only 7 attempts. Every 7 attempts, he broke a tackle. To give you an example of that, Nick Chubb and Josh Jacobs, it took only, 1 out of, every 11 attempts, they broke a tackle. But Ronald Jones broke one every 7. Now, the difference between, and so did Devin Singletary. But the difference is that Devin Singletary is slow. And even today, they're reporting that Devin Singletary is having difficulty being able to get through the tackle box where Zach Moss is flying through it in comparison on the same plays. And so, I think that Devin Singletary had more tackles he had to break, or more what people would qualify as a tackle attempt. Ronald Jones was breaking legit tackles in comparison to a guy like Devin Singletary, who I've often kind of joked and said, if an offensive line and a running back are a marriage, then Devin Singletary's in that marriage that a lot of people would envy as that partner who gets to stay home with no kids, have an allowance, and be able to go shopping whenever the heck they want to, without any kind of responsibility whatsoever. That's kind of where Devin Singletary was sometimes with a lot of the opportunities he got as a rookie. So I've been kind of waiting for the Zach Moss training camp notes to come about, and they've come about.
And they are. Joe Buscaglia, who's one of the best covering any team, pointing out that, hey, maybe Moss is going to be better. I love it when the beat writers directly address fantasy players. How far we've come, Matt, like the 15 years we've been working together.
Right.
And then when I see a beat writer directly address fantasy players, like stop, almost break down the fourth wall and say, fantasy players, if you're reading this right now, I would say this is what you want to get out of this. And it was that maybe you're underrating Zach Moss a little bit compared to Devin Singletary. And you bring up an interesting point about Singletary, that if the Bills were setting him up to succeed well last year, it may have created a false impression of how much his game can grow. And they really did get the perfect compliment to him when they drafted Zach. I say it every time I mention Zach Moss. They're going to love him in Buffalo. Just love him. I mean,
he's Travis Henry. That
Yeah.
was my comp for him before the draft. He is literally Travis Henry with better pass protection skills and better receiving skills.
Just mentioning that, because I know that's good old confirmation bias, and there's nothing wrong with confirmation bias. Like, feel good whenever things are adhering. The Ronald Jones positive buzz. It's not a bad thing. It's good. It's better than if there's nothing being said about him. Certainly better if there's something negative being said about him. But
like Hakeem Butler.
What is there news on Hakeem Butler, or just a lack?
Not at all. Just
No.
lack of news. There we go.
Yeah,
Anyway.
I don't know what happened there. I mean. We can go. I go all the way back. When I think of Hakeem Butler, Matt, I think of just a long line of wide receivers Mark Harrison. Like these receivers you see, like the length and the fluidity. You were talking about the transition upfield. It's a subset of fluid athleticism, right? Fluid athleticism and coordination. When you see that in a big, thickly built receiver, the possibilities run away with themselves. Hakeem Butler was one of those guys, but there's that part of it, the great emotional divide that you wrote about so eloquently, that we can't gauge from the outside. Even the player himself doesn't know until he's in the crucible. Like Aaron Curry, I think, is a good example. But not so much. It can be stuff on the confirmation bias side, actually. But what in the first 3-4 days of practice, like Dr. Gene was saying, what has stood out to you? What's something that's happened that made you go back and say, I have to look at where I have this player ranked, or this team, this situation, and make sure it matches with my current understanding?
Laviska Shenault. Really liked Laviska Shenault coming out of school. Thought he was more than just a gadget guy, and pretty much have written a boiler room that says he's more than a gadget guy. He's a better route runner than people realize. And pretty much they came out and said, he's a better route runner than we realized. And we think, and he's such a freak of an athlete that I already had him at I thought I had him at a pretty high level, but I put him inside my top 50 of receivers today after hearing that. I think after, another guy that I would say who I'm starting to give a little bit more to. I was tempted to give a little more to, and I said, nah, that's ridiculous. He's a rookie tight end. Rookie tight ends don't do jack. And I love Jared Cook. And Jared Cook is a terrific player, but Adam Troutman, let me tell you, when Mark Schofield and I were talking about him on a podcast, Mark said he interviewed him at the Senior Bowl, and even though he's that little, that guy out of Dayton, we have a guy out of Dayton who's pretty good on this show every week, or at least in the Dayton area. So, Troutman knew all the protections and had advanced skill with protections and different types of line calls and route adjustments that a lot of big-time school athletes don't have. And so Mark feels like he's already ahead of the game. And they're already talking in New Orleans to a degree that they're like, he could be a dark horse candidate as rookie of the year at the way that he's playing and picking things up so fast, and putting him in a 2 tight end set with Jared Cook. Now, I'm not putting him in my top 10 or top 15. I just added more stats on him that he's actually on the board now as someone to consider, and also someone to put on my waiver wire where I'm like, dude, if Jared Cook gets hurt, watch out.
which he does. It's funny. I actually thought you were going to say Devin Asiasi. Devin Asiasi. I don't know. Just he's also getting ahead of the curve reviews in his blocking, and we know that he can be a handful as a receiver, and we know that Patriots offense needs help. Chenault, and just in general, I know that a month ago I thought, ooh, no offseason, slow ramp up, see how these guys are ready. The rookies are ready. Wow. The rookies are ready. Brandon Ayuk is ready. Jalen Reagor is ready. And these are guys that, we might have watched them and said, there's holes in their game or areas that need to be shaded in more if we're translating them to Sundays. It sounds good so far. CeeDee Lamb, of course, another one. But Laviska Shenault stands out because, boy, it sounds like the Jags are ready to embrace his specific talent. That they're not going to try to sand down the edges. That they're going to see him for what he is. And there's a lot of buzz that points to the possibility of him lining up in the backfield at times, lining up all over the formation, and them saying, and look, Shenault is the guy from this class. This was an incredible wide receiver class. But if you were looking for the guy that was like the specimen, like DK Metcalf is turning into, Shenault was the specimen. The guy that you just look at and you say, I don't even know how good this guy can be. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, you look at his combine time and people go, oh, it's pedestrian. Yeah, he ran it with a hernia.
Yeah.
He ran the damn thing with a hernia. He's been worn down to the nub as a player in college football. It's the same thing, I got to get my little Chad Kelly reference in here at least once every couple of weeks due to the contract obligation I have with Satan. But basically the situation is that, Chad Kelly, he said, I'll beat anybody but Lamar Jackson in a race. And everyone's laughing about that because of all the things that he's done that have been stupid and foolish and maybe due to mental health issues. But the one thing that's true, and I'm right because we were right there watching that Georgia tape, is that dude's fast. And Laviska Shenault is one of those guys that I've re-ranked my 2020 draft class with some of the new criteria I used for the 2021 RSP. And Laviska Shenault is one of the guys that stood out pretty tall. And I already had him ranked higher than most anyway. I think he would have been my number 2 receiver on my board. I got to go back and look. But I remember that he was even higher than like top 5, top 7, wherever I had him.
I got really lucky in all my dynasty rookie drafts, Matt, because I had a strategy of if I had a pick, say from 9 or 10 on, I was just going to trade down to the early mid-second, like 2-4, 2-5, pick up whatever assets I could, and just take the last receiver from that tier. Because
good for you.
And it was always Shenault. It was always Laviska every time. And I was like, well, okay, I guess I'm just going to get a lot of Laviska Shenault. And yeah, it's exciting. There's a lot of positive buzz. Also a lot of positive buzz about DJ Chark, by the way. DJ Chark just sounds like he has really showed up to camp carrying over what he did last year and is just ready to hold court.
He couldn't have gotten to where he was last year without putting a crap ton of work into it. And that switch had to have been activated and literally like permanently turned on for him to get where he got. Like
something religious happened,
Yeah.
Like he's going to be. We're going to be talking about DJ Chark for decades as that player. It's not just when a player doesn't do anything of note in the rookie year. It's when a player has affirmatively negative indicators. If you watch DJ Chark in his rookie year, you thought it's not coming naturally.
DJ Chark is going to screw up a whole generation of 20-something draftniks who are going to cite him as a reason for why that promising physical guy could actually turn into a stud, because they'll cite DJ Chark and you'll go, that's great, because DJ Chark is one of like probably 100 receivers that you're going to say that about, and he's going to be the only one you got right. Because it's I remember watching him with Lori Fitzpatrick, and we were like, she liked him, and I liked things he could do. And one of the things I remarked was, hey, kind of like early Doucette, kind of like Ted Ginn, doesn't use his hands right. But he still makes the tough catch. If he can figure out the hands part, watch out. Well, I would have never thought in a year he was able to do that, because the rest of those guys are still doing math problems with their hands, and they've been in the league a long time.
Yeah, well, they are what they are, right?
Yeah.
Once they are crossing over from college to the pros, they're not going to necessarily reinvent themselves. Although Benny Snell lost 12 pounds and reshaped his body, so we're going to watch Benny Snell. He's the real handcuff to James Conner. But you're right, because Chark, watching him at LSU, he fought the ball, or the ball would play him.
Yeah.
And that is something that you never, until DJ Chark, you never see a guy turn from a receiver who fights the ball to somebody who has that crystal clear, high definition ball tracking and physical ability to not just have a large catch radius, but be able to harvest the ball throughout the catch radius, whatever kind of torquing or leap timing or extension it takes.
He's an inspiration, man.
Yeah.
He's a total inspiration. I am such a fan of him now. And it has to do with what he did last year, that he transformed his game like that. How can you not be a fan of somebody like that? From that point on, I'm like, I'm probably biased too positively about that guy because of that. Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that, because that taps into something for fantasy football. I can't remember who I was talking with this about in the last week or so, that it's a way you can share in players' greatness. So draft him so you can get that rush every time. He's great. Dean's great. Soon, hopefully, Cecil Lammey will be great with us. So you're great, everybody, joining us on Thursday night. We're back. Football's back. The Fire Hose is back. Cecil and I will be doing some news and notes shows next week. I'll be on the couch probably more than once. And everything is ramping up. So if you love Football Guys, if you want to support Football Guys, subscribe. Get lots of things, including an entry into our $35,000 contest, which is really, really fun, by the way. A great puzzle and a challenge. First prize is $20,000. So that's cool. You just get an entry because you're a subscriber, among other things. And just it's a great thing to be part of our community again, and to have so much for our brains to process and digest and try to put in the right place. We're going to be here doing that for you always, folks, because you're so very classy.
So we got to have an